Hello, this is a video that's going to go over the concept of engineering change requests, manufacturing change requests, and configuration management. So we're going to cover all of those, but at a very high level, just so you become familiar with the issues and the problems. So as an example, I'm showing you a picture of this particular model of car. And we have a couple sort of change requests coming through from different places in the organization. Marketing is reporting that customers are complaining about the difficulty in replacing the headlights. And the shop floor says that this connector on the mirror isn't fitting well. So we have these two requests for changes, and what usually happens is they come into configuration management. And then configuration management contacts the people who have the ability to evaluate this change and then start the process of managing this particular change. And what that means is really like looking at, should we do this or not? And when should we do that? And who should be involved? So I'm going to look through sort of some of the questions that often come up when we think about these processes. In most established companies, these processes are actually well established. There's a particular procedure and everybody knows what to do. But if you're in the process of changing sort of the change management, configuration management process, you'll need to understand all of the intricacies. So one of the questions is, what is the real role of configuration management? Is it a team or is it a person? Now, the answer is it really depends on the size of the company. Another question is, who deals with the changes? Who needs to be involved in particular changes? Who reviews the changes? Who and how are changes approved? So we might look at the change and then someone has to say, yes, we should do that change, or we should do it that way. Who makes sure that the change is communicated throughout the organization? Are the part numbers, the SKU, the stock keeping units impacted? And do part numbers have meaning? So what is the meaning of the part number? And do they indicate particular configurations? When is a change released? Are they released one at a time? Are they batch? Is there going to be a brand new configuration, which is multiple changes into a product? How is the ERP system involved? Usually ERP systems help manage this configuration process, and there's workflows defined in the ERP system. But then there's other questions like, if you're developing a new product, which is changing all the time because you're tinkering with it, you're prototyping it, when does the document control process start? When does configuration management come into place? And then the last question I have, which is not exactly the last question, there's still a lot of questions. What if you do not control manufacturing? How, in the sense that you don't have it within your operations setting, how hard is it to do this configuration management with suppliers or with contractors who are making your parts? So we're going to look at these things kind of group by group. So the role of configuration management, who deals with changes, who reviews changes, who and how are changes approved, and who makes the changes, make sure the change is communicated. So this all management of the process of changing when a change happens. There's a lot of issues around that, like the reviewing of the changes requires that somebody does a calculation about the cost and benefit of this particular change. And then who approves it? So depending on the level of the change, the level of the impact of the change, different areas of the hierarchy of the corporation are involved in the approval of these changes. And then how do you communicate this? Lots of times you use software, but also you might not. You might actually need to have conversations about these changes and understand, even before they're approved, who's impacted. So this is like a flow chart, and you don't necessarily need to be able to read it, but the idea of across the top are the people who are involved in the change. And then there's a flow related to it. Who's reviewing it and how do you schedule it? prepare packages to communicate it, execute it, etc. So, and you can see that configuration management, that CM function, is heavily involved most of the times in these kinds of changes. Another issue is related to parts numbers. So if we're going to be changing a part, we need to have a whole new part number, because if you have, like let's just say in a car, you change the mirror on the car, and then somebody wants to replace a mirror. They need to know which configuration is they're using, which part number they're using. So you need to create another part number. But sometimes you don't. So like if you just change like a label on the part, maybe you don't need a new part number. But if you use anything related to the interfaces with other parts, you would probably need a new part number. But you can see part numbers, and I don't know if you've ever seen this when you're dealing with on your internship, but part numbers, which is often called a SKU, which is a stock keeping unit, which means this particular part has a place on the shelf in the stock and we keep it. So stock keeping unit. And they often have numbers associated with that have meaning. This is just an example of a part numbering system, but you need to understand that. And when does it get to be a new revision and when does it not get to be a new revision? And then also, how do you release these changes? Are that you keep them and you wait to do it in a batch, which is probably a better idea, because then you have a whole new configuration that can then be released to the customer and people can identify what particular configuration that is. But in the case of safety issues, you need to release them very quickly. So you can't delay on things that have some sort of implication for safety. So looking at when to release them and whether to release them one at a time or in a new configuration. And then the next question is, how is the ERP system involved? So there's a lot of software to manage the configuration. In that flow chart that we saw earlier, that would be all in the workflow and who's going to be looking at it next and who has an action next and what meeting needs to be called, what communication, who needs to sign off on things. So all of that is included in the software, and often bigger companies have software or as part of their ERP system. Another question might be, if you're developing a new product, say you're in an R&D process, when do you start having to do document control, which means like when you have to manage the configuration. Like this version is version 1 and then version 2. And you've experienced this when you're working on a project. Say you're making changes to the project all the time and trying to control the documents. And some of us have a really hard time, including me, managing that change process. We might want to go back to a previous version, but we've lost it. We don't know where it is. And so this is all very true at a major scale when you're looking at actually new product development. So this is kind of a graph here that really talks about the formation, the validation, the vision, the product marketing fit, and then in the later stages, you need to growth and scale up. And this is when you need to be thinking about things like configuration management. And this is very, very hard for entrepreneurs to go from sort of a garage kind of production process to something that's at scale. And one of the things that's hard is this configuration or document management. Another process is what if you do not control manufacturing, meaning that you have contractors doing your manufacturing. How hard is this to get involved in the configuration management? And it's more difficult because you don't have as much communication, you don't have as much control. So there's a whole process when you are dealing within the supply chain to look at this configuration management. So I hope that's a little bit of an overview of this whole process of configuration management and engineering change requests, manufacturing change requests, these kinds of things that actually do often fall under the process of change management.